Hello and greetings to all of you in Hyderabad and those joining in from all around the world. It's a great pleasure to be with you today on this TEDx talk. I'm Soumya Swaminathan and I'm the Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization. And I've been closely involved with the response to the COVID pandemic. I can think of no topic that's more timely than the theme of this meeting and the theme of the year that you have set up, and that is resilience. The COVID 19 pandemic is the biggest health crisis that the world has faced for a century. And it has laid bare so many factors that contribute to, as well as so many that tear down resilience. That's the spirit that makes us able to deal with what is happening around us, to our countries, our communities, societies, families, and friends. So it can work in both ways. And I think we can talk a little bit about how stressful situations like the pandemic can actually lead to increased resilience, or it could also lead to a breakdown of resilience, depending on how we approach it, how governments approach it, how leaders approach it, how role models approach it, and how we could change a negative experience into something that actually brings people together and actually increases resilience. So, I'd like to talk briefly about some of these factors and about what we are learning about how people thrive or do not thrive in a public health emergency of this kind. The role of governments is critical, has always been critical to how ordinary citizens will respond to this pandemic, to any crisis. We see that those governments that were well prepared and swift to put detection, control, and response measures in place, that they were communicating with their citizens, they have reaped the confidence of their citizens and, in fact, have been able to control the disease much more than those countries that were slow to respond to WHO's warnings that this was likely to become a global health emergency. They have, in fact, really reduced the ability of their citizens to cope with the measures that are necessary for the response. And this in turn leads to a slow control of the infection. So, for example, there are governments who downplayed the potential of the virus's spread and severity. They were slow to respond. The pandemic plans were inadequate or non existent. And there were some that were more concerned with their own nationalism than with global solidarity. These characteristics have also contributed to partisan political divides over an apolitical virus and to conspiracy theories. And there's been new ammunition for the anti-vaccination crowd. As you know, the anti-vaccination movement in the world is a movement that's really taken wings with the social media, and it's leading to decline in immunizations against measles and against other childhood immunizations, and has led in the last couple of years to increasing rates of measles infection and measles deaths in many different parts of the world. And this has really nothing to do with literacy or education. It's just a movement that people believe in, and it's fed by misinformation and rumors. We've seen in the last few months the touting of useless and evidence-free and possibly harmful remedies for the COVID. And when people are desperate, they're willing to try anything. At WHO, we have long known that disease outbreaks must involve the engagement and cooperation and assistance of ordinary people. We learned, perhaps most of all, in the first large outbreak of Ebola virus disease in West Africa in 2014, that insights from the social and behavioral sciences are just as important for outbreak control as virology and epidemiology. We know that till communities in West Africa were actually involved and engaged in the response, there was fear, there was mistrust, and there was no cooperation from the community. And that, in fact, led to the prolongation of that outbreak. And it is only when that realization happened and that communities were actually engaged in driving the solutions and driving the response to Ebola that things actually got under control. I would like to call your attention to an excellent article, a current article that just appeared in Nature Human Behavior by Bavell and colleagues, which reviews issues that policymakers need to understand for optimal pandemic response. The authors took as their inspiration a paper published in Science in 1919, which documented lessons learned from the 1918 influenza pandemic, which killed more people than died in all of the First World War. And the author of this 1919 paper concluded that three things got in the way of preventing the spread of the pandemic flu. Firstly, not appreciating the risks. Secondly, it seemed contrary to human nature that people should isolate themselves in order to protect others. And thirdly, that people acted perhaps unconsciously in ways that made them dangerous to themselves and others. I dare say these three factors are alive and well today, only more so. Some of the other relevant issues include threat and risk perceptions, emotions, and fear. We must balance how we talk about threats so that people have, if you will, an appropriate level of fear, neither overplaying nor downplaying the threat, such that people feel capable of dealing with the threat by changing their behavior. Leaders need to ensure accurate dissemination of the balance of the costs and the benefits of the interventions used to control the outbreak. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of accurate information and extensive communication, and it has to be a two-way communication. One has to be able to engage with people, to be able to answer their questions in a way in which they understand why certain decisions are being made, why certain actions are being taken. And that means involving the community leaders, engaging in that discussion and really having a participatory approach to the response. At WHO, we are also saying that we're fighting an infodemic of inaccurate information, rumors, and the astonishing speed with which social media allows false information to spread around the world at lightning speed. So we've created this new term called infodemic, which is basically an epidemic of information, but it's mostly misinformation that tends to spread much more rapidly. There are many facets to this kind of effective communication. First, we have to persuade people that the common good and the shared purposes are noble goals. We have seen, especially recently, tremendous displays of individuality expressed in very negative ways. When authorities ask citizens to, for example, wear masks, ensure physical distancing, not to gather in crowds, as a form of protection for others and a show of solidarity for all, it is very disheartening to see an overemphasis on the individual and a complete disregard for our communal life. People must understand that we all benefit from preventive measures. It's not us against them. It is all of us together. One way to counter this is to seek out and support leaders who have credibility among diverse audiences. They could be religious leaders, community leaders, social influencers, they could be celebrities, anyone, people who have followers who listen to their voices. It's really important to engage these leaders to help us spread solid public health messages. And WHO has been doing quite a lot of that over the last few months. We also need to target our messages and tailor them to the needs of the poor and marginalized and other groups with specific needs, such as the homeless, the refugees, migrant workers. Home quarantine and locking people down has had the horrific effect of driving up interpersonal violence and domestic violence, especially among women and children. And the after effects of the economic downturn are going to be felt particularly acute by these same vulnerable groups that we just talked about. In Europe, we've seen that people in care homes have been disproportionately affected because of the fact that they're all living in one closed environment and they're also elderly and more prone to the infection. In other countries, there are other groups, people living in urban slums, people who are in prisons, homeless shelters, and other places where there is not possible to have physical distancing. Those are the areas that we really need to concentrate on and have special approaches and strategies to deal with the actual circumstances in which people live. So our public health responses need to pay attention to all of these factors and help them maintain their resilience as much as possible. The pandemic has also had searing economic and social effects. We now see the downside of the gig economy, the informal workforce, and the lack of universal health coverage. Millions of people have lost their jobs. Many families have no income. Parents are having to do their jobs at home while also homeschooling and taking care of children. And even in some of the richest countries on earth, people are lined up for miles and hours to receive food from food banks. The stresses have perhaps never been greater in modern memory. When the history of the COVID-19 pandemic is written in many, many papers and books, plays, films, portrayed in many art forms, I'm sure we will have learned many lessons, and unfortunately, to our great cost. We live in a globalized, interconnected world. Viruses know nothing of borders. Therefore, what affects one country in one part of the world has the potential to wreak havoc upon all of us. We must take the view that we are global citizens. A spirit of solidarity and care and concern for our fellow inhabitants of this planet. Old fashioned virtues, I will admit, must return to our common shared life. The fate of all of us depends on it. Thank you very much.